immigration emerging as the central issue in the US presidential elections? A federal appeals court has put Texas state's controversial immigration law back on hold just hours after the US Supreme Court had cleared the way for the state to begin enforcing the measure. In a brief order, a three-judge panel at the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals voted 2-1 to wipe away a previous ruling from a different panel that had temporarily put the law, which would allow state officials to arrest and detain people they suspect of entering the country illegally, into effect. The panel of judges that issued Tuesday night's order is already set to hear arguments on Texas's request to put the law, Senate Bill 4, back into effect, pending the state's appeal of a federal judge's block on the law. Regardless of how the Fifth Circuit acts next, the appeals court will still hold arguments next month over whether the law is unconstitutional and should be blocked indefinitely. The legal jockeying over this law had made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, which earlier cleared the way for the measure to go into effect after the justices rejected emergency appeals from the Biden administration and others. The decision had handed a significant, though temporary, win to Texas, which has been battling the Biden administration over immigration policy. The bill, SB 4, signed into law by Republican Governor Greg Abbott in December, makes entering Texas illegally a state crime and allows state judges to order immigrants to be deported. Immigration enforcement generally is a function of the federal government. The law immediately raised concerns among immigration advocates of increased racial profiling as well as detentions and attempted deportations by the state authorities in Texas, where Latinos represent 40% of the population. A federal judge in Austin had blocked the state government from implementing the law, holding last month that this law could open the door to each state passing its own version of immigration laws. The Supreme Court's three liberal justices also raised concerns over this law as they dissented from the High Court's order that permitted it to take effect for a short period on Tuesday. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, whose dissent was joined by fellow liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, said the order invites further chaos and crisis in immigration enforcement. The law, she wrote in her dissent, upends the federal-state balance of power that has existed for over a century, in which the national government has had exclusive authority over entry and removal of non-citizens. The case could very well make its way back to the US Supreme Court. And as we said, it does look like immigration could emerge as the key issue in the November presidential election, with many Americans expressing frustration with Biden's immigration policies and Trump repeatedly slamming Biden over this issue at rally after rally. Now, according to an AP NORC poll that was held in January this year, the share of voters concerned about immigration rose to 35% from 27% last year. 55% of Republicans say the government needs to focus on immigration in 2024, while 22% of Democrats listed immigration as a priority. That's up from 45% and 14% respectively in December 2022. And Trump has laid out updated immigration proposals that would mark a dramatic escalation of the approach he used in office, and that drew alarms from civil rights activists and numerous court challenges. Some of those proposals include reviving and expanding a travel ban, imposing ideological screening for migrants, terminating all work permits, and cutting off funding for shelter and transportation for people who are in the country illegally.
Today marks a critical moment as the Supreme Court of the United States has approved SB 4, a controversial law in Texas. Yesterday, the court had placed it in an impasse, but today it has been approved. SB 4 is widely criticized for its anti-immigrant, xenophobic, and discriminatory nature. Under this law, authorities in Texas are empowered to detain and potentially deport any migrant or individual found circulating in the state, regardless of their long-standing residency in the United States.
All right, so how big is this issue likely to be in the November presidential election, and could it, as some Republicans would like to believe, seal the fate of President Biden? Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Ambassador Shilkant Sharma, former Indian diplomat. He joins us from New Delhi. Adit Kothari, foreign affairs expert, joins us live from London. Irina Sukuman, a geopolitical analyst, is live with us from New York. And Patikrit Pine, foreign affairs expert, also joining us from New Delhi. Thanks very much to all my guests for joining me. Patikrit Pine, if I could begin with you. Now, you're somebody who has repeatedly said that immigration is a huge issue for a vast majority of Americans. There is no doubt that Trump will use every possible opportunity to slam the Biden administration over its immigration policy. But do you believe come November, this could emerge as the most key issue in deciding the fate of the two presidential candidates?
Good evening, Neha, and good evening to all the fellow panelists. Let me reiterate in a little different way, Neha. I think more than immigration, it is the illegal immigration which has become a very big bone of contention between the Democrats and the Republicans. I'm not saying that Trump had a drastically different view on the whole issue of immigration. Let me tell you where the bone of contention is. Trump administration wanted that most of these immigrants who want to come or are coming illegally, they claim to be asylum seekers, they claim to be persecuted. So the contention of the Trump administration has been that till the time their papers are checked, they should stay in Mexico because Mexico has almost become a facilitator. On the contrary, what the Biden administration has done is that it has allowed en masse the entry of everybody into United States, primarily through Texas and 3 other states bordering Mexico. And it is happening at such a scale that it is almost on the borderline of being called an invasion. Now, if you have a situation like this, you would have a state like Texas, which has the largest border with Mexico, would feel overwhelmed because there's a limitation of the capacity as to how much the state can take care of illegal immigrants vis-a-vis while taking care of the security and other things of the legal citizens of that state. So that perspective, if you look at it, what the state government of Texas did in terms of passing the SB4, where for repeat offenders the punishment was to the extent of 20 years, it would have been all too fine if rights activists had appealed against that in the Supreme Court. What happened was that the Biden administration went ahead and filed an appeal against it. Now, Biden cannot at the same time blame the Republicans and Trump for blocking a border bill and at the same time do something where the governor of Texas, who is equally accountable to the people of his state, from doing something to make its own state is much more easier. I'll tell you where the bigger issue is. A federal judge in Illinois actually came out with a verdict earlier this month, which stated that illegal immigrants have the constitutional right even to carry a firearm. Now, a situation where an overwhelming invasion of illegal immigrants start threatening the security, sanctity, and economic independence or economic security of the people, legal citizens, invariably, however much somebody can be liberal, would start questioning the very veracity of the government's intention. And that is exactly what's happening here. If a course correction is done by Biden in the next few months, I don't know in that case what would happen. Again, it's not that Trump administration wants something drastically different, but I think United States must do something about the whole concept of what they want to do with this entire invasion that is happening, because it's nobody else but the people of United States who for a long time since 1945 have stayed away from all kind of conflicts, allowing conflicts happening elsewhere in the world. Today they are facing the same crisis which Europe has been facing for almost a decade now or more than that. So among many other issues, whether it is economic or otherwise, illegal immigration is becoming an issue because it is impacting every colony, every city and districts and states. There are 12 states in United States which are called sanctuary states, where you cannot touch an illegal immigrant. The police is protecting them. Now, the job of the police cannot be to protect illegal immigrants at the cost of the legal citizens. So fundamentally, Neha, the issue is this. The federal government says it is our job, it's not the job of a state government to decide what they do with the illegal immigrants. But is the federal government faltering in terms of protecting the economic and otherwise security of the people of the country? If that so happens, then in that case, for any democracy, not just United States, invariably people will start speaking about it. And that is exactly what is happening in United States now. How it would impact November election, it is too early to say, but it is one among the many issues that is gaining traction so far as US is concerned. Back to you, Neha.
Gaining traction. Thanks for your opening remarks, Patikrit. And of course, you're right in saying that we must draw a distinction between immigration and illegal immigration, and the latter is a huge issue in the United States of America, you believe, and it will also emerge as one of the key factors in the presidential election. However, Adit Kothari, if I could come to you now, the concern is that a law of this nature, Texas passes it, currently it is on hold. We don't know if it will eventually come into effect. But the Biden administration, many others went ahead and challenged this law because the concern is that it feeds into, the xenophobia and racism that already seems to exist in large sections of American society, and something that Trump has capitalized on in, some would say, in a very dangerous fashion. Now, for instance, one concern that has been raised is that something like this is going to increase racial profiling. You're going to have a lot of people being detained, arrested, deported. And if you look at a state like Texas, Latinos represent 40% of the population. And then, there are judges in the United States who have said that such an order invites further chaos and crisis in our immigration enforcement. It upends the federal state balance of power that has existed for over a century, in which the national government has had exclusive authority over entry and removal of non-citizens. So there are two aspects to this. One is, who should be the final arbiter, the federal government, or should states be allowed to have their own laws? And number two, is this likely to further fuel xenophobia and racism in the United States?
Thanks, Neha. Thanks for having me. There is a broader trend in the United States where the Supreme Court is making a lot of decisions which is actually turning the balance. So it's actually shifting a lot of laws which were previously, which you would see stuck with the federal government, is now sort of transcending to the state level. So that has been the broader trend, which you've rightly put out as well. And ahead of elections, it does raise very important questions. And it is also going to be at the front and center of the election campaigns for both the political parties. Immigration per se has been one of those particular issues which the Trump administration during that first endeavor had also played quite heavily. And when Biden administration took over, they essentially unturned everything that the Trump administration had put in place in terms of border policing. So given that this particular temporary law, it does allow policing, and it does definitely propagate that sort of racial profiling that people have been talking about. It does also burden the state policing as well. But ultimately, we also have to assess how the government structures are actually also responsible for this. The economic security, the economic burden that Patikrit essentially spoke about, that's a massive concern. I am living as an immigrant in the United Kingdom, and I know very well, the kind of checks and balances that I have had to go through legally to be able to live in this country. So it is extremely unfair to all of those people who are essentially paying their taxes, being in this country or any part of the world where they're actually immigrating legally, to actually see this kind of illegal immigration being pandered to by the state. So that leaves a lot of questions open as to why is the state essentially indulging in this kind of pandering. We've had multiple issues, even as we speak now. We have senators from the United States essentially trying to patronize and preach India on how they should conduct themselves with regards to the Citizenship Amendment Act. But what they don't realize is that you have a limited number of resources, you have a limited mass area, and you have economic challenges to feed into. So you've got to keep that balance, which I think the Biden administration is fast losing on. And going into the November elections, I think this is going to be quite quite an important criteria to play out from an election campaigning perspective. Neha.
Adit, your perspective is certainly similar to that of Pathikrit, who's also made the point repeatedly that, to allow so many illegal immigrants, as seems to have happened in the United States, seems unfair not only to the American citizens but also to those who have migrated to the country legally. You refer to yourself how you have to jump through the hoops. It can take years, to meet those criteria, etc., etc. But I want to ask you one question before I take this to Irina, and I'm playing the devil's advocate here. The question is for Adit. Adit, you, like many others, have said that the Biden administration is guilty of pandering to this constituency of illegal immigrants, that it's encouraged illegal immigration. The administration has happily looked the other way for political and electoral gains. But is it not correct, Adit, that an illegal immigrant does not have a vote in the US election?
It doesn't have a vote today, but it will eventually in the future. I mean, if you see what the Labour government has done in the UK, for example, they've pandered asylum seekers, and as a consequence, you've been here for 5 years or 10 years, then you eventually end up getting rights to vote. And those votes usually translate to the left-leaning intelligentsia or the left-leaning political parties. So, for example, 2.4 million, I think, is the figure that the United States essentially put out in terms of illegal border crossing just over the last fiscal year. I think there are about 1.6 million who are currently living illegally in Texas alone. So all of those issues, will play out in the election campaigning. Eventually, when they do get processed through the system, and when they do essentially get rights to vote, we know exactly where those votes are going to translate. So it's not rocket science at the end of the day. Neha.
Okay, all right. So you believe that the Democrats encourage it for political reasons? Well, that is also the allegation that's made by the Republicans. Irina, there was a poll done by APNORC in January this year, and it throws up some very interesting statistics that tell us that it's not just Republicans, but a very large number of Democrats too who are concerned about illegal immigration into the United States. So according to this poll, the share of voters concerned about immigration rose to 35% from 27% last year. 55% of Republicans say the government needs to focus on immigration. 22% Democrats say that for them immigration is a priority, and these numbers have gone up from the previous year. So I'm going to ask you this question. How big a factor do you believe it is likely to be in the US presidential election? Could it become the deciding factor in the end? Because if it does, most believe that it's going to go against Joe Biden. And also, would it be correct to say that it is almost as big a concern for Democrats as it is for Republicans?
Well, thank you for very interesting questions. It is immigration, or rather border security. I'd like to distinguish it is indeed a bipartisan concern. Unfortunately, the very much needed effort to reform legal immigration in a way that makes sense and meets various US economic and other interests has been stalled for many decades, and so far there has been no real progress in that regard, even though it's badly needed. But border security is a concern. It's a concern for both security reasons and for humanitarian reasons, and also for economic reasons. From a security perspective, there's a natural concern about masses of individuals that don't have documents, or that have been coached to tell stories that are not easy to verify. Many of them don't speak English. There is a shortage of resources in vetting these individuals, and then there's been concerns about crime syndicates, foreign intelligence agencies, and human traffickers taking advantage of the situation, exploiting it. From a humanitarian perspective, 8 million migrants who've crossed the border have been detained, which is the highest number in recent history for sure, and has doubled since recent years. That is a huge percentage. There's a shortage in facilities. The Department of Homeland is under-resourced and has had to release a lot of these people, and it's incapable of doing its job. And even sanctuary cities like New York, where many of these migrants have been bused, are not able to provide resources for this population. So you have people literally living in the street. On the other hand, it's also a tremendous economic burden on local communities. And from a political perspective, I should note that there are two additional concerns. In Texas, the Hispanic community is very old and very well established. Some people there have been living for over 100 years. Many of them are, in fact, as or more concerned about the influx of migrants over the border as everyone is non-Hispanic population. Many of them have actually been joining the Republican Party specifically for that reason, in opposition to this measure, and that is likely to affect the outcome on a state level and in particular numbers. So the other issue is the fact that some communities, such as San Francisco, have been attempting to circumvent limitations on voting for migrants by including some of them into councils, local councils, and decision making, which also has been a concern to a lot of people. When it comes to the final election, a lot will depend on what Joe Biden does. Will he bypass the Congress, which has been stuck for partisan reasons, and create an executive order policy that will provide additional resources to DHS? Or will he continue allowing this chaos that forces states to take measures into their own hands with because you cannot easily separate migration policies from local state security.
All right. I need to go across to Ambassador Shilkant Sharma now. Ambassador Sharma, while some may argue that President Biden still has time to course correct between now and the November election, others say that the damage is already done as far as immigration is concerned, and it's emerging as an Achilles heel for the current president. Now, recently, both Trump and Biden visited the Mexico border, incidentally on the same day, within just minutes of each other. And this is what Biden said. He said, I would say to Trump, instead of playing politics with the issue, join me. I'm telling you, pass the bipartisan bill that we have introduced. It is the toughest, most efficient, most effective border security bill this country has ever seen. Trump goes on saying that immigration in this country is a mess, it is a warlike situation, and it is all Biden's fault. Biden says we brought in this bipartisan law to tighten immigration in this country, but you did not let us pass it. You did not let the Republicans vote for it because you want to exploit the issue for electoral reasons. You want to go on attacking me and blaming me. Do you believe that is a strong enough counteroffensive that has been mounted by President Biden? Come November this year, which narrative is likely to emerge as the stronger one on the very emotive issue of immigration?
The way things are moving at the present juncture, the Trump campaign is going to emotionalize, sentimentalize, sensationalize every issue that he takes up. They are not going to get into the legalese. And, it not be very far, it not be very far from them to dismiss any such thing as, pettifogging legal kind of stuff. And they will throw up the emotional issue that, being swamped by people, and the illegal immigrants and criminals and, the entire fear syndrome from immigrants. So that is Trump's strong card. And Biden's problem is that in his own party, the Democratic Party, there is the left group which wants him to be very liberal. At the same time, he wants to be, he's looking for a middle ground so that illegal immigration is curbed. There is regulation. There is, the act which he brought in the before the Congress. All these are systematic way to deal with it. But Trump will have none of it. And as you move towards the election, these emotional things, this euphoria or whatever, will continue to dominate. So Biden has a uphill task actually at this juncture, because this issue has become very, very divisive, and also it defies reason, the way Trump's campaign is going to mount it. So, for instance, the Texas people sent the immigrants to New York and other states which were liberal on the question of immigration. But then they had a lot of problems in New York. There were 100,000 immigrants there in New York. So the New York governor has to take action. Same way in California also there's similar problem. So there is this, there is this whole exercise where those who want to be generous to the immigrants, to want to be humane, the other side wants to tax that that aspect, to say, okay, then if you do so, then lump it. Now that makes a social problem. So I won't be surprised if in the coming months, even the democratic states and the constituencies which have been voting for Democrats might be plumbed by the Trump fellows
Okay.
on immigration.